Hello developers, welcome to day 17 of the 30 days of JavaScript challenge. Today presents another opportunity for us to tackle challenges and enhance our understanding of JavaScript concepts. Let's dive in and make the most out of this learning journey. Today's challenge says, write a class that allows getting and setting key value pairs. However, a time until expiration is associated with each key. And the class has three public methods. The first one is set, which accepts an integer key, an integer value, and a duration in milliseconds. And once the duration has elapsed, the key should be inaccessible. And the method should return true if the same unexpired key already exists, and false otherwise. Both the value and the duration should be overwritten if the key already exists. So that is the set method. So there's this get method. If an expired key exists, it should return the associated value. Otherwise, it should return -1. Then the count method returns the count of unexpired keys. So let us look at an example to see how this should work. So let's say you have made these actions. You call the TimeLimitedCache. Then you call the set method, the get method, and the count method. Then the get method again with these associated values. And keep in mind there's this time delays here. So at time 0, you call the TimeLimitedCache, and this is used to instantiate the object. So the cache is created. So that's how you get the output of null. Then if you call the set method and you set these three inputs here, you know that the first one is the key, this 42 is the value, and 100 is the duration in milliseconds. So it should return false because this key does not exist. You have seen here, the method should return true if the same exists. If it does not exist, it should return false. So it returns false because there's no key of 1 and value 42. So it should return false. So the next is get. So get returns if the key exists, it returns the value. If the key exists and it has not expired. So this our key here expires after 100 milliseconds, and this get is called after 50 milliseconds. So that means that our key has not yet expired and it's there. So it should return the actual key. That's why you get 42 here in the output. Then if you call count, and you're seeing count returns the count of the unexpired keys. So at time 50, our key is there and its count, there's only one key. So the count will return 1. The number of unexpired keys is 1. Then at time 150, notice that our key will expire at time 100. So at time 150, our key is already expired. So if you get the key, you should not get any value because the key has already expired. You can see here, get, if an expired key exists, it should return the value. Otherwise, it should return -1. That's why we're getting -1 here because our key has already expired. If it was not expired, we could get the value of that key. But now since it's expired, we are getting -1. So you can go to example 2. Example 2 also, it's calling the time cache, set, get, and these values. So let's go with them one by one. So the first is this time limited cache, which is instantiating the cache object. So here the cache object is constructed. That's why you get null. That's always the first. This is always the first action. You cannot call anything until you get an object. So that is the first action. So the second action they call set with the value 1, 42, and 50, just like the way you did before, and we got false because this key does not exist. Okay. Then you call set again. Then you set 1, 50, and 100. Then you'll get true because this key 1 exists. You can see here in the set it says that accepts an integer once it says that this method returns true if the same unexpired key already exists and false otherwise. So we get true because that key already exists. That's how you get true. You can see how you get true because that key already exists. So this one will replace. You have seen it will overwrite. Here you can see in the set if the key exists, you should overwrite it. Should be overwritten if the key already exists. So now our key 1 now contains the value 50, not 42, because this 42 was overwritten. and the new time is now 100 milliseconds, not 50 milliseconds. Okay, so if you call get, you'll get 50 because our key was overwritten. The value now is now 50, not 42. That's why you get 50 here. Then if you call get again, keep the 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5. This is time 50, this is time 120. If you call get at time 120, this was set was called at time 0, set again was called at time 40. This other get was called at time 50. The next get will be called at time 120. So if you call the next get, you'll get 50 again, because this time is not yet expired. But if you wait for another 200 seconds, this will have expired. Now you'll get -1 because this one has expired. Then if you get the count will be 0 because all the keys have expired and there's no active key. So that is it. So the constraints are the value of the key should be between 0 and 109. The duration should be between 0 and 1000 milliseconds. The actions can be between 1 and 100. And the actions.length should be equal to the values.length. And the actions.length should also be equal to the time delays.length you have seen. And the time delays can be between 0 and 1450. And each action can be either be time limited cache, set, get, or count. And the first action is always this time limited caches and must be executed immediately with a 0 millisecond delay. So that is the challenge. So let us learn some key concepts first before we solve this challenge. The first key concept that we learn is about object-oriented programming, and in this case, classes. So a class is just a blueprint for creating objects. And to define a class, use the class keyword, then the name of the class. It will start with a capital letter. That is convention. So I'll just get the name of that class, in this case, person. And a class can have attributes and methods. Attributes are variables which hold data specific to the instance of the class. And methods are functions within the class that operate on the class attributes. So that is the definition of the attributes and method. So attributes can either be public, private, or protected. But in this case, we'll just focus on the private and the public attributes. So public attributes are just straightforward. You will simply define them in the constructor or directly on the instance. So since I've not talked about constructor, let me show you how you can define a public variable directly on the instance. So I can just create an instance of this class. I'll say person1. And to create an instance of this class, in this case, and to create an object, use the new keyword. Then you write the name of the constructor like that. So here I'm using the default constructor because I've not defined my own constructor here, but we'll define our own constructor in a few moments. So we're talking about the public attributes. So I've said to define a public attributes, you can either define them in the constructor or directly on the instance. So let me define it directly on the instance. So I can say person1 can have a attribute of name. So I can say person1 dot name. In this I'm defining the public attribute directly on the instance. So I can give it a value like, I can say John, like that. I have defined this attribute name directly on the instance person1, and I've given it a value John. And to access this, you can just use the same syntax. Let me just log it in the console. I can log person1 dot name. This is how you access a public attribute. You just write the object dot the attribute name. Use the dot syntax here. So if I save this code, I expect it in the console to just log John. You can see it logged John. This is how you define a public attribute. And private attributes are prefixed using the hash sign. This sign is called pound. No, hash. That sign. Hash sign. Those are private attributes. They're defined with that sign, and they are only accessible within the class they are defined in. This ensures that the attributes cannot be modified directly from outside the class. So let me just define I can define a age attribute, and it's private because I'll put this hash sign there to say it's private. So if I try to access that, if I try to say like person1 dot age, it will bring me an error. And if I hover my mouse here, you can see it says that wait, the property age is not accessible outside the class person because it's a private identifier. And that is how private works. So private, you can't access it outside the class. And we'll see how we can assign it values inside the class. We'll see that in a moment. So that's the difference between public and private attributes. You can see this. I cannot do something like this because you cannot access this private attribute outside the class. You can see the class ends here. So I cannot access this age outside this class down here. I cannot. I can only access age inside this class. So that was with attributes. So let's go to methods. So methods, we have said they're just functions, and there's a special method called the constructor. So a constructor is a special method that is used to initialize object properties when objects are created. Like this was the default constructor. It's used to initialize this person. So we can define our own constructor like that. So I want to, when an object is created, I want someone to create an object with the name. So I can pass the name here. Then I can define inside this method, I can just say something like this dot name is equals to name. So this keyword in this context, I know there's too much this, but okay. This keyword in this context refers to the object. In this case, this here. You can see this one is similar to line 13 down here. This is like saying this dot name is equal, then you give it a value. This value is gotten from the constructor. So if you call this constructor method, we'll have to pass a value in it. So in this case, if I had to create an object using this constructor that I've defined here, I use the default constructor that is not a must to define. It just comes automatically when you create a class. So, but I've defined my own constructor here. So if I want to create an object using this constructor, I'll just use the same syntax, new, but here I have to pass a name. So I can pass a name. Let's say in this case, I'll have to remove this line because now I'll create a person1, then I'll pass the name like that, John. In this case, this one will call this constructor with the value name. So this instant, that is in this case, person1.name will be equal to the name, John. And I can still access it in the same way we accessed it. So if I log, I still expect it to log John in the console, but you can prove that. So if I run this code, I expect it to log John in the console. And you have seen it logged John. So that is how you use the constructor. You call it and you pass some values if you have defined them up here. And there's also another method. It's not a must that the only method. There you can also add some other methods. Let me just get another method. So I'll get this method, say hello. And what this method does, it just logs hello there in the console. So it just log hello there in the console. So you have seen that I've defined this method without the function keyword. And we already saw how to do that. You can define, if you define a function inside a class, you don't use the function keyword. You just define it like that. Then if I want to access this method, you have to access a method using an object. So first, for me to access this method, I have to have an object. And in this case, I have this object, person1. And I can access this using the dot syntax as well. I can say something like person1 dot say hello. Then I'll call that method like that. So in this way, I've accessed this method using this object person1, and I've used the dot syntax. So if let me just comment this one. So if I save this code and go to the console, I expect to see hello there. So if I run this code, I'll see hello there. Yeah, and you can see there is hello there in the console. So that is how our class work. That is how you create public attributes and private attributes. But you have not seen about this private attribute. So these private attributes, you have seen that you cannot assign them values outside the class. So we can just look at how to assign values to this private attributes. So there's this special methods called the getter and the setter methods in classes. So I'll start with the setter method. So the setter method is a method within a class that is used to modify the value of a private or protected attribute. And in this case, you're using the private attribute. So to define a setter, you just use the set keyword, then name of your method, Then in most cases, this name is just similar to the name of the attribute. So I'll just say set age, but you can just give it any name, but it makes sense when you just write it age. Then this setter method requires, you can say it requires, it must have exactly one parameter. So you can take in the age, then you say something like, this is used to modify the value of a property. So you can say this dot age is equals to age, like that. So this age is this our property here, age. So this is a private property. That's why we're using the hash. So that is the set. Then the getter method is a method within a class that is used to retrieve the value of a private or protected attribute. And it just has the similar syntax. So it just get, then age. It takes no parameters. It only returns the value. So return this dot age, like that. So that is how this setter method and getter method are written. And to use them, just use them as how you access methods in the class. So I'll just say something like person1 dot age. So here I'm accessing this setter method here, age. So you can see is equals to, let me give the value 30. Then if I want to access the age, I just use the same syntax. So I just log the age. I'll just log person1 dot age, like that. Should be a dot here, not comma. And if I run this code, I expect in the console to see 30. And you can see I've seen 30. But someone might say, maybe I didn't use this one. I created a new property of the age. So to prove that I'm using this setter, I can put a condition here. I can say if the age that is passed here, if the age passed there is less than 0, return age cannot be negative, like that. So now if I put here something like negative 30, this one, if I log it, it will give me undefined because the value of age was not set to a given value. I didn't set the value of age. That's why I'll get this undefined because the age will not be defined. I'm trying to show you that I'm using this set as, I'm not just creating. Initially we saw that we can do something like person1 dot, let's say, dot height. Then I say something like, let's say 6. Then if I log height, I'll see the value of the height, and it worked. So I'm trying to prove that here I'm not creating another property called age. I'm using this age setter method here to assign the value of 30 to this person1. So if I save this code and I run, if I log the value of age, it should be undefined because the age was not set. But if I get the value of age to be negative 30, I know that this setter was not used. So let me run this code. So if I run this code, I'll get undefined because I'm sure I'm using this set. I think there's an error. Let me check. Set age. What's the error? Let me just check. If age is less than 0, return age cannot be negative. I think it's fine. Down here, I'm just getting it fine. Let me run it again. And you can say get undefined because age was not set. But if I didn't have this setter, let me just comment out this setter and getter. Let me just comment them out. So if I just comment those out, then I run this code, I'll get negative 30 because I'll have created another property called age that has the value of negative 30. So if I run this code, I expect to see negative 30 in the console. I don't know why my node is misbehaving. I didn't get anything. Did I even log the age? I should get negative 30 because person1.age is equal to negative 30. If I log person1.age, I should get negative 30. So let me save that. Let me just also remove this code altogether. Don't know. I feel like it's getting me some issues. So let me just check. I think it's fine. So let me run the code. I expect negative 30 in the console. That is what I get, negative 30. That is to mean that initially we are using the getter and the setter method that were there initially. And that is how we use the get and set, and this is the basics of object-oriented programming. So to learn more about object-oriented programming, you can visit our Learn JavaScript playlist. I'll attach the link in the video description. Now that you know about classes, we can use that knowledge and other previous learned knowledge to solve this challenge. So this challenge requires us to create a class. So I'll just create a class. I'll call it TimeLimitedCache. So there is my class. And we know that a class can have attributes and methods. And there's this special method called the constructor. So this constructor is a special method that is used to instantiate objects over class. So, and if I look at this example, I can see that this constructor is not called with any arguments. So it means that it will not take any parameter. But I want to define a public attribute here that will store this data. So I'll call it cache. So I'll say something like this dot cache. And I've seen that this data will be stored in a key value pair. So I'll use the object data type. You can also use the map, but you have not learned about maps yet. So I'll use the object. Then this class also takes in some methods. I'll just copy them. So there's this set method. We'll implement it in a little bit. So there's this set. There's this get method. So I'm just copying the methods first. Then there's this count method. So I'll start with the set method. So the set method accepts an integer key, an integer value, and a duration in milliseconds. So these key values are integers, then this duration is time in millisecond. So once the duration has elapsed, the key should be inaccessible. Okay. The method should return true if the same unexpired key already exists, and false otherwise. Then both the value and the duration should be overwritten if the key already exists. Okay, so the first thing, I'll check if a key exists. So to know if a key exists, first I'll have to access that. I'll say this dot cache. I'll have to access that value of that key. So you know that if the value is present, it will return a value. And if that value is not there, it will give me undefined. So I'll check if the value is there. I'll save that in the variable. I'll call that variable existing entry. So if the value of existing entry has something, it will be present. It will be existing. And if it gives me undefined, it means that there is no key with that value. So that I'll check here. I'll say here if existing entry like that. So we know that this one, if it has a value, it will be true, and if it is undefined, it will be false. So this line retrieves the current key, the current entry associated with this key that is provided here, and it checks it in this object. Okay. So if this key is there, we are told you're supposed to clear the timeout. So if the key is there, we're supposed to restart this duration. And you know how to restart the duration is just to clear the timeout. So you'll have to just clear the timeout. So I'll just clear timeout that was set with some timeout ID that we don't have it. Yes. So let me just leave it blank. We'll come back to it. So if that exists, if that entry is there, we'll clear the timeout that was set for it to restart. So yeah. So the next step, if it is you have cleared, you have to set a new timeout. So to set a timeout, you can use the set timeout function that you already learned. And I've said that this set timeout function takes in a callback function and duration in milliseconds. Okay. So here you can pass in our duration that was provided and this function was called, because you want when a value is added, you want it to stay for this time before it expires. Then after this time is up, we want to expire that it's called a key. We want to expire that key. So to expire a key, and you have seen if you expire a key, it should not be accessible. So you can just delete it from the object. And to delete something from the object, you can use the delete operator. And the delete operator, you have seen that it is used to remove a property from an object. So to remove this property, you can use the delete operator here. So I can say something like delete. Then what should you delete? This item, this dot cache that has the key of So I think that is fine. So if this one, if this item is there, or if it has, if it has expired, we want to delete it. So this will be the timeout to check if it has expired. Then we can store the value and its timeout ID. So the value associated with the key and the timeout ID of the new timeout can be stored in the cache object. So you can store it like this. So you can say this dot cache that has a key of that key that will be provided will be equal to the value that will be provided and the timeout ID that will be returned from this set timeout. So this set timeout, we know that it will return a timeout ID. So I can say const timeout ID, timeout ID. Then this timeout ID is the one that will be stored here. Timeout ID like that. So this line, the value, this line 17, the value associated with the key and the timeout ID of the new timeout will be stored in this cache object. This ensures that the value associated with the key and the timeout ID are stored for later references. And if this key exists up here, we should check the existing entry. So you know that this existing entry now it will have this timeout ID. So it will take this existing entry and clear timeout with that timeout ID of that existing entry. So I can say existing entry dot timeout ID like that. I think that is clear. Then the last thing that we're supposed to do, we're supposed to return a value. And this value can be either be true or false, depending on whether, you can see here, the method should return true if the same unexpired key already exists and false otherwise. So if this expired key exists, it should return true, or it should return false. So you know that to check if something is truthy, we can use this. You can either write an if statement or use the Boolean function. So I'll just use this Boolean function. So I'll return, and I'll use this Boolean function, and know that the Boolean function converts this data here into a Boolean and returns either true or false. So I'll check if this existing, it's called the existing entry. So the work of this function is just to allow to tell the caller to know whether the entry is updated or it's a new entry being added. So if it's updated, it will return true because it exists. And if it's a new entry that is added, it will return false. So that is how this set method works. So I hope that is clear. The next method is this one, the get method, and you have said that if an expired key exists, it should return the associated value. Otherwise, it should return -1. So you can just use the same logic as above here. So to check if the key exists, you can use this logic. So I'll just copy that and paste that. Then I can, and you know that this one, if you say if existing entry, you know that if this key exists, it will return a value, and a value is truthy. And if this key does not exist, it will return undefined. So if you get undefined, this one will be falsy. So you can use this to check if the key exists or not. And I've said if it exists, it should return the value. So I can return existing entry dot value, because I've seen this existing entry has this key called value. You can say existing entry dot value. Okay. Then else, so I'll put here else. I shall return -1. So I'll return -1. That's what the silence says. So that is it with the get. Then there's this one count, and count should return the count of unexpired keys. And you know that all unexpired keys are stored in this object called cache. And there's this function in JavaScript, it's called object.keys. It's an inbuilt method that returns an array containing the names of enumerable on properties of an object. So if you want to get all properties of an object, you can use this object.keys. So I can say something like object.keys. Object.keys. Then I'll call my object inside there. And in this case, my object is this.cache. Like that. So if I do this, I'll get an array containing all the enumerable properties of this object. Then since it's an array, I can get its length. I can use the .length property that we learned to get the length of that array. And this one should return the the count of an expired key. So I should return it. So I can just return that. So yeah, and this one should solve our challenge. So we'll just try with the example 1 to test it. So let us try with the example 1. So if you go to example 1, you can see first, let us just do it in practice. So I'll first call this TimeLimitedCache. So I'll create that object. So I'll just create an object like that. I'll call it cache is equal. I'll use the new keyword and use our class, our constructor like that. So it does not expect any arguments. So I'll just leave it like that. Then that is the first thing that you do. You call this TimeLimitedCache, that is to instantiate the object. Then the next thing you call this set with this arguments after 0 at time 0. Time 0 is immediately. So I'll just call the set immediately. So I'll just say cache dot set. And I'll call set to this. I'll just copy this values here. I just copy that and call set to that. And since I want to see the results in the console, I'll just log this. So I'll just console.log here. Okay. Then next, I'll call get at time 50. So after 50 milliseconds, I want to call get. So I have to put a set timeout there. So I'll set timeout, and you know that set timeout takes in a callback function. And the delay time in this case is 50 milliseconds. So I'll just put there 50. And in this set timeout function, I want to call the get. So I'll call get like that, cache.get. And get takes in the key. And in this case, the key is 1. So I'll call it with 1. Then I want to log this in the console so that I can see it. So I'll just console.log there. Okay. Then next, I'll call count after 50 milliseconds. So also I'll have to call count after 50 milliseconds. So I'll just duplicate that, remove this one, then replace this get with count. Okay. Then I'll call get again, but after 150 milliseconds. So I'll just duplicate this, set timeout, but change the time to 150 milliseconds. And in this time, I'm calling get. So I'll just remove this count. I should call only get. So yeah, that was example 1. And if I run, I expect to see false, 42, 1, and -1. So let me run and see this, if I'll see that in the console. And you can see indeed in the console, I saw false, 42, 1, and -1. And we already discussed why we see those values. You can just do the same for example 2. So that is it with this video, guys. See you in the next video. Peace out.